NewsX World. Let's look at the top headlines this hour. Protests are erupting across Israel as Hostages and Missing Families Forum holds a day of demonstrations demanding the return of captives still held in Gaza. Images show major roads blocked with rallies set to continue in cities nationwide throughout the day. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel deeply regrets the tragic mishap after a strike on Nasser Hospital in Gaza killed 20 people, including 5 journalists. Netanyahu insists Israel values the work of journalists and medical staff. In response, UK Foreign Minister David Lammy said he was horrified. Germany called the attack shocking and France's Emmanuel Macron declared it intolerable, urging Israel to respect international law. Turkish President Erdogan also slammed Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, accusing it of relentlessly destroying everything that belongs to humanity. President Donald Trump hosted South Korean President Lee Jae-myung hours after a Truth Social post warning of a purge or revolution in Seoul. Lee diffused the tension with flattery, even joking about a Trump Tower in North Korea, but the meeting produced few breakthroughs on trade or defense. President Donald Trump told reporters he hopes to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un this year, even if he hosted South Korean President Lee Jae-myung for their first White House summit. Trump said he remains open to further trade talks with Seoul while renewing criticisms of America's ally. North Korea says ongoing joint US-South Korean military drills shows Washington's aim to occupy the peninsula, warning such exercises target countries across the region. A top general told state media that if drills continue, Seoul and Washington will face an unpleasant situation and pay a dear price. President Donald Trump has announced the immediate removal of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, accusing her of making false statements on mortgage agreements. The sacking marks the first time a president has ousted an FED board member in the bank's 111-year history, as Trump escalates pressure on the central bank. Australian police confirm an active incident is underway at a property in Porakuna, which is around 300 kilometres northeast of Melbourne. Australian media says 2 officers have been shot dead and another has been injured. Now we start this hour in the Middle East, where families of Israeli hostages in Gaza have accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of sacrificing lives to preserve his political position. Speaking outside Tel Aviv's defense ministry, they claim he ignores their plight while continuing military operations in the Gaza Strip. Let's listen in to what a mother of an Israeli hostage had to say.
במשך 690 ימים הממשלה מנהלת מלחמה ללא מטרה ברורה. איך החטופים החיים והחללים יחזרו? מי ישלוט בעזה ביום שאחרי? כיצד משקמים את המדינה שלנו? היום זה ברור שנתניהו מפחד מדבר אחד, וזהו הלחץ הציבורי.
Israel estimates that around 20 hostages remain alive still in the Gaza Strip, out of the 239 taken during Hamas's October the 7th attack. Negotiations mediated by Egypt and Qatar have reached a critical stage, with Hamas demanding full Israeli withdrawal and the safe return of displaced people. Mass protests have erupted in Tel Aviv as the Hostages and Missing Families Forum leads a national day of struggle. Highways and ministers' homes have been blocked, with relatives calling for an immediate hostage release. The protests come as Israel's offensive in Gaza continues, with thousands dead and nearly the entire population displaced amid international calls for ceasefire and humanitarian access. We are now joined by Professor Gilead Hirschberger. He is a political psychologist from Reichman University. He joins us live from Israel now to talk to us live. Thank you very much, Professor Hirschberger, for joining us here on NewsX World. Professor, families of these hostages have accused the Netanyahu government of sacrificing their loved ones to save his political career. How do you believe such a perception shapes public trust in the leadership narrative here during wartime?
I think it's important to understand that the political climate in Israel has changed over the course of the war. If initially there was a high level of support for the war in Gaza, today we see opinion poll after opinion poll that the majority of Israelis support a ceasefire, they support an end to the war, and a return of all the hostages. At the moment, the Israeli initiative, the Netanyahu initiative to attack the city of Gaza enjoys very little popularity among Israelis. Most Israelis want to see the war over and want to see the hostages returned.
Yes, many of these families are not only grieving, but leading these mass protests. What are the mechanisms which are driving these families to being such major political actors in such moments of national trauma here?
I think we've reached a point where many of these families are desperate. Their loved ones have been in Gaza for nearly 2 years. It's very clear that if Israel does engage in the new offensive on the city of Gaza, it would endanger the lives of the remaining hostages. When there is at least a hope of a compromise of a deal on the table, there are indications that such a deal is possible. And these families are demanding the government to take the deal and not continue with the offensive.
Thank you very much, Professor Hershberger. You are staying with us for more updates from the ongoing conflict in Gaza. The world is responding to yesterday's strike at Nasser Hospital, which killed 5 journalists from various organizations. China's foreign ministry has just joined the global condemnation of the strike in Gaza, calling for an immediate ceasefire and urging Israel to stop military action. Here is what Jiao Jiaquan, the China foreign ministry spokesman, had to say on the issue.
我们对医护人员和记者再次在冲突中不幸遇难感到震惊，予以谴责，对遇难者表示哀悼，向遇难者家属表示慰问。中方高度关注当前加沙地带局势，反对和谴责一切伤害平民、损害民用设施、违反国际法的行为，包括针对新闻记者的暴力行为。
Germany has also said it was shocked by the Israeli airstrikes on the hospital, which included journalists in the dead, and called for an investigation. The German Foreign Ministry urged Israel to allow media access and protect journalists operating in the Strip. US President Donald Trump expressed displeasure with emphasizing the need to end the conflict. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy also said he was horrified by the strikes and called for an immediate ceasefire. Turkish President Erdogan condemned Israel for, quote, villainous attacks, blaming the Netanyahu government for continuing strikes that destroy humanity's basic values. French President Emmanuel Macron also weighed in and called the attacks intolerable, noting that the deaths of at least 20 people, including journalists, stressing the need to safeguard civilians in Gaza. Now we're once again joined by Professor Hershberger. As we've just heard, a strong plethora of reactions there from both adversaries of the Israeli state and, of course, traditional allies of Israel. What are your thoughts on the current military actions of the Israeli Defense Forces in the Gaza Strip? 5 journalists killed in these strikes, with what some people are calling a double tap assault, with video footage of the strike circling online. Also a message from Benjamin Netanyahu not necessarily jumping to the gun and calling those killed in the attack Hamas agents like we have seen previously. Professor, your thoughts and the feelings around you on this attack coming out of Israel?
So I think the attack yesterday is different from previous attacks in several ways, and may turn out to be a watershed moment in this conflict. One of the main differences is that this attack was televised. It's very clear that the people who were hurt in the attack were journalists and civilians and not Hamas terrorists. That's one difference. Another difference that I think is important to point out is that Netanyahu never condemns anything and never expresses any kind of regret about anything. And in this case, he has expressed his regret. This is unusual for him to do. And maybe the third difference is that even traditional Israeli allies have condemned the attack and have called for an end to the conflict, and that includes President Trump, who has pretty much announced that within 2 or 3 weeks, the war needs to end.
Yes, and Professor Hershberger, people have accused Israel of silencing journalists and silencing voices coming out of the Gaza Strip. This is due to the fact, of course, that international journalists are not allowed into the enclave, which means that the journalists that were killed were indeed Palestinians who have been hired from the outside international legacy media companies that we have previously mentioned. How does this play into that narrative, and what does Israel think of it?
Well, up until yesterday's attack, it was very clear that the boundary between journalists and terrorists is a relatively fuzzy boundary. We've seen during the attacks of October 7th that many of the journalists also moonlight as terrorists, or the terrorists moonlight as journalists. But yesterday, it was much more clear-cut. Yesterday, it was clear that the people who were hurt by the attack were not involved in any kind of terrorist activity. And so this is one of the more clear-cut cases of attacking people who were very clearly not engaged in any kind of activity against Israel.
Thank you very much, Professor. You are staying with us to discuss further developments. And this one comes out of Australia, where Iran has vowed reciprocal action after Canberra expelled its ambassador over accusations linking Tehran to anti-Semitic arson attacks in Sydney and in Melbourne. Iran's foreign ministry rejected the accusations, promising a reciprocal reaction to what it called an unjustified diplomatic move. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced the expulsion, citing credible intelligence that Iran was involved in directing the attacks on a Sydney restaurant and a Melbourne mosque. Albanese condemned the attacks, warning that they come amid a significant rise in anti-Semitic acts in Australia since the Israel-Hamas war began. Professor, your thoughts on this, and Tehran's objectives in orchestrating these attacks, if Canberra's allegations turn out to be very much credible and true?
I think this is a very important development in Australia, because this is one of the first times in which a government clearly points a finger at Iran for being involved in anti-Semitic and anti-Semitic sentiments and attacks against Jews and Jewish communities. This is something that's quite unprecedented. And it is important to point out that, first of all, Iran is seeking revenge against Israel after the 12-day war. And one of the ways that Iran has traditionally sought revenge is through attacking Jewish communities throughout the world. There was, of course, the infamous Buenos Aires attack against the Jewish community. And it is important that Canada is addressing this and making this very explicit.
Thank you very much, Professor Hershberger, for joining us here on NewsX World. Thank you for taking the time. We now move on once again, and according to reports, US and Russian officials discussed energy deals during peace talks over Ukraine this month. Sources revealed that the discussions aimed to incentivize the Kremlin to agree to peace while easing sanctions on Russia. Talks included ExxonMobil's potential re-entry into Russia's Sakhalin-1 oil project and the possibility of Russia purchasing US equipment for LNG projects. Another idea was for the US to buy nuclear-powered icebreakers from Russia. These discussions took place during US envoy Steve Witkoff's visit to Moscow and were also touched on at the Alaska summit. We are now joined by Asuma Katauka, who is an anchor and correspondent. She joins us live from the NewsX World Newsroom. Asuma, what more can you tell us about these reports?
Yes, Thomas, as you have said, that media reports show that on the sidelines of what's supposed to be focusing on peace talks, reports show that Trump and their envoys discussed more business deals with with Russia on the sidelines of the peace talks that were supposed to get some deal between towards the ceasefire. Instead, they show that they have been closer to getting the deals haven't been closed yet, but the talks have showed that the deal could be close to reaching a deal, business deals with involving Russian LNG companies, Russian gas and American LNG companies, and Russian gas. Also, some of reports show that they could have been talks about pushing Russia to use more of American equipments instead of Chinese equipments. You have to note down that China and Russia have a no-limit deal, which was signed off before Putin's invasion started, only days before Putin's invasion started in Ukraine back in 2022. They have a no-limit deal, and many critics are side-eyeing this deal and these reports that instead of reaching a peace deal, they are Trump's envoy and Trump's administration is eyeing business deals and saying that this will make this is a step towards reaching a peace deal. However, critics argue that maybe America is eyeing to push China outside of the picture to make Russia use more American equipments in their oil production and in their gas production. And also something that has been discussed is deep sea mining as well. Reports show that Russia is ahead in deep sea mining, or going ahead with deep sea mining more than US and China, and US and China both are pushing Russia to use their equipments instead. Well, it shows that Russia here maybe has an upper hand because America, also China, they want them to use their products instead of, and we are talking about machinery that is in $1 billion, not just millions, but billion in investments. So this is what we have come to know so far.
Thank you very much, Asuma, for providing that context. We, of course, will bring you all the updates on the Russia-Ukraine conflict as we get them in. However, we next move over to the United States, where US President Donald Trump, in a Truth Social post, issued a new tariff threat against countries that impose digital taxes and enforce regulations on tech companies. Trump stated that these regulations are discriminatory towards American tech companies and give Chinese tech firms a free run. President Trump has threatened that he would impose additional tariffs on that country's exports to the United States, which does not remove taxes and such taxes and legislations. Trump also threatened to restrict the exports of highly protected technology and chips from the United States to countries that do not remove these regulations. We are now joined by Jayjit Bhattacharya. He is an economist and finance expert, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Jayjit Bhattacharya, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Digital taxes, what are they? Who benefits from them? Is there any backup to what Trump is stating here, that that certain countries are discriminatory towards American over Chinese? What more can you tell us, and context can you bring to this story?
First we need to understand what is digital tax. When a good is exported to another country, there is a tax code which the US administration calls as the tariff. So various countries have tariffs for goods, but when a similar service is provided digitally, for example, a Google ad search or e-commerce, there is no tax that is imposed by most countries. It was getting neglected. There was some kind of an understanding to not have digital goods taxed. But that does not make sense for most countries because it is their region which is being used, it's their economy which is being used, while the taxes from the profits are going somewhere else. And typically, these are tax havens in which these taxes are going. And so there was a competitive taxation that was going on where one regime would say, if you set up your headquarters in our tax jurisdiction, then we will tax you much lower, which would be a bleeding which will happen for governments which are not the tax havens. And the business is happening in those economies, but the government is not getting any taxes, and some other government was getting the taxes, which is where the concept of digital tax, or as it's called in India, the equalization levy was put in. And this was just to bring in parity and to ensure that there is taxation imposed on an equal basis, and the services that are being provided have tax parity, and that's what the digital tax is all about. Now, countries such as India have actually unilaterally rolled back such taxes. India had removed its 6% equalization levy, and then before that, which was on the advertisements, before that, there was a 2% equalization levy on e-commerce, which has also been rolled back. But other countries and economies which have not rolled back their digital taxes, what the US administration is saying is that we will come after you unless you roll back those taxes. And in addition, what the Trump administration is also saying is that these taxes have been put only on American digital organizations such as Amazon and Facebook and so on, but they're not being put against Chinese tech organizations, which is not really the fact, because these taxes that are put in, the digital taxes, are agnostic to whether the company is of an American origin or a Chinese origin.
Yes, thank you, Jayjit Bhattacharya, for joining us here and for that very clear and concise explanation there. We now move on and we stay in the Indo-Pacific, where Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized the importance of strengthening China-Russia ties. Speaking to Russian Parliament Speaker Vyacheslav Volodin, Xi called for a deeper strategic trust between the two countries, reinforcing their efforts to create a more equitable international order. He stressed the need for cooperation in uniting the global South and upholding multilateralism. The context of this meeting comes as the US is considering new sanctions against Russia, with President Donald Trump stating he may impose massive sanctions on Russia depending on progress in ending the war in Ukraine. Despite the challenges, Xi framed the China-Russian relationship as a cornerstone for global peace and stability. Meanwhile, Putin is set to visit China later this week, where he will attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and a military parade marking the 80th anniversary of the Second World War's end. The visit will also see Putin's continued efforts to strengthen bilateral ties with China, which have become notably closer since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We are now joined by Andrew K.P. Leung, who's a China strategist, and he joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us here on the program. Andrew, your thoughts on the current state of Moscow-Beijing ties?
Yes. Well, I think that over Ukraine, Russia seems to have been bogged down, contrary to its early optimism that they could just overrun the Ukraine in a couple of weeks or even in days. But now there's been bogged down for years, and they're running out of bodies, and that's why they're relying on North Korean soldiers to a certain large extent. So Putin is amenable to some sort of an early solution, but he's not desperate because the Russian economy is doing quite well. exporting its energy, on which it relies on its economy, through countries like India. And of course, China had always been, even before the Ukraine war, the largest customer of Russian energy and agricultural products. And that's unlikely to change because, as I said, that happened long before the Ukraine war. Now, Trump is trying to put pressure on India not to buy Russian oil, but I think India is maybe it's not that easy to surrender. But on the side of Russia, they're under tremendous pressure because they want also to end the war on their terms. And they're seeing an opportunity because Trump is also running out of patience. He wants to end the war and hopefully win a Nobel Peace Prize, but also concentrating his attention to Asia Pacific to contain China, but also trying to extract money from China as well, and all other countries in the region. So this dynamic translates into maybe a broker deal between Russia and Trump. And China is unlikely to get directly involved in the war, and is also unlikely to succumb to American pressure.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew. You are staying with us to discuss further China update, where Beijing's top trade negotiator Li Chenggang met with Canada-China Trade Council in Toronto today. This comes as Trump has levied tariffs on China, Canada, and they are looking forward to strengthening their ties. We are now joined once again by Andrew K.P. Leung. Andrew, could you tell us a bit about the Beijing-Toronto relationship, how that they plan on moving forward while tackling these new trade measures by Donald Trump?
When Donald Trump went in the White House the second time, almost on the first day, he wanted to make Canada the 45th state of the United States, and apart from wanting Greenland. But then his unilateralism against a long-term American ally north of American's border, Canada, really anger a lot of Canadians, and it's fortified the Indian Prime Minister currently determination to defend Canada's sovereignty. But as the American tariffs war carries on, Canada on the one hand is finding its ability to defend its interests because United States still rely on a great deal on Canada's steel and other products. So Canada is able to exert pressure on the United States. So on the other hand, Canada is also recalibrating its relationship with China, for example, because after all, China is also the world's biggest customer for agricultural products, on which Canada's a lot of exports depend. And along with the whole world system is now so broken that Canada also wants to find a way to uphold the international trading system, at least, or the rule-based order, and hence Canada's closer relationship with China.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew K.P. Leung, for joining us here, and thank you for taking the time. Well, that is all that we have time for this hour, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you for joining us.